Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share yet another comparison between the Sony A7C and the RX10 Mark IV. Now, I know this is going to make people crap their pants. Full frame, 1-inch sensor, how could you do it, Ed? Well, because it's my channel and I can do it, you know what I'm saying? So, $1,800 US for this body alone, $1,600 for the RX10 IV out of the box. The RX10 Mark IV has been on the market for a while now. I anticipate Sony will have a Mark V soon that will probably be the creme de la creme bridge camera that never will be beaten by any other bridge camera on the market, but we'll see. It doesn't exist yet, so vaporware, I can't even, it's not even vaporware. But let's get at this. So almost 1,800 versus 1,600. If you're thinking about the A7C, and I feel like the A7C is drawing in a lot of users that traditionally wouldn't consider full frame, that's why the RX10 is relevant. Because the beauty of the A7C for me personally is that it's so small but still full frame, has great 24 megapixel still quality, great dynamic range, and 4K 30 video that has in-body 5-axis stabilization, that's fine, but you have that gyro capability that is captured so that in post you can basically end up with footage that looks like it was on a gimbal, which is amazing. You also have the benefit, of course, of Sony's flip-out display for self-filming. No new menu system like the A7S III, but still good. Limited touch functionality. You have an EVF, you have weather sealing, 10 frames per second. Shooting. It's impressive stuff. It really is for its form factor. You have a Type Z battery, which means over 700 shots. That means you may not need to carry another battery. And then, of course, there's buying lenses, which is not an inexpensive affair. You can go with the kit lens. It's only going to run a couple $100 more, 28 to 60 mil. It's sharp. It's a tiny little pancake. It does the job. And if you're a first-time prosumer, full frame shooter, this will probably do the trick until you want to spend more cash. But if you're going to really get the most out of this camera, you're going to be buying at least something like the 24 to 70 or the 16 to 35 Sony Zeiss lens. And those are going to run you over $1,000. And that is where the RX10 IV comes into play. So yes, it's a 1-inch sensor. It doesn't have the dynamic range of this camera. It doesn't have the buffer of this camera. It doesn't have real-time tracking for video of subjects. The overall autofocus performance of this camera, the A7C, is really tough to beat. But this has everything out of the box that you're going to need, literally. Your battery life will not be as good, of course, because it's working with a W series battery, and that's something, by the way, that I anticipate is going to change on the next gen. You can see I'm using a generic that's a Vemico W series battery, but the RX10 does deliver a focal range that, in order to get out of this camera, you would need to buy a $2,500 lens like this, and you still wouldn't have the same reach. Now, I'm not for a moment pretending that you get images and video that would match full frame out of the RX10. I'm not insane. I've been doing this for a long time. So come on now. But you do get very good results. And I think that the average consumer that is entertaining the A7C will be more than happy with the still and video capability of the RX10. And that is the reason I am doing this comparison. Now, when it comes to accessories, I did this in my comparison with the A7R2 as well. The digital shotgun mic that Sony makes, not going to work here, at least natively. It will work here natively. So from an audio perspective, this is a great pickup for $300. It'll change the video that you get out of this, especially if you want to vlog, anything like that, since it has the vlog capable display. This camera, on the other hand, has Sony's old school style screen. I can't believe I'm even saying that, which, by the way, does have advantages. Even though it can't flip out and, you can't look at yourself, your beautiful face, you can get shots that you can't with this, because in order to actually flip that display, you need room on your left side. Now, I'm not saying that you won't always have room on your left side. I'm not saying you will. But with this, you'll never have to worry about that. So that's about the only upside to this display. The EVF, very similar quality, very similar. But the win goes to the RX10 simply because there's at least a form of an eye cup, whereas there is absolutely no eye cup for the A7C. Now, eventually we may see some kind of aftermarket China eye cup thing come out, but right now, as it stands in the month of November 2020, the EVF on here is probably the biggest problem I have with the A7C. If you followed my A7C coverage, you already know that. So I'm actually going to say I prefer the EVF on the RX10 Mark IV, especially because of its location. I'm left eye dominant. Center is always going to be best for me. Now, even though we have some touchscreen capability on the A7C, it's incredibly limited. And even though the RX10 can actually outperform in burst mode the A7C, I can't give that to the RX10 because the autofocus will not come close to the A7C. Yes, it's hybrid, so you do have phase and contrast, same type of experience that Sony's been delivering now for years to improve their autofocus reputation and product. And it is realized here in the A7C in cameras like the A7R4 and the A9 series, of course, 1 and 2, and of course the A7S3. Even in the APS-C lineup, the A6400, A6600, you have some great performance. Even in other consumer cameras like the ZV-1 that I use. But one thing, regardless, even though this has that hybrid system, it's just nowhere near the ability of this camera. So while this can literally physically shoot more images per second than this, which comes in at 10, here you'll have a much better shot of having 50% of them being keepers than this camera. What this camera does deliver, though, besides being a complete solution out of the box, is more of, dare I say it, a digital SLR feel. And that's not just because of the size, but it's because of the physical readout, which you won't find on any other Sony modern camera, believe it or not. It's just something Sony doesn't believe in. You also, I think, have better ergonomics here. Personally, I do like the feel of this camera better, much better. The RX10 is a favorite of mine. If I know it's the only camera I can travel with, I know I won't be let down. So right now, it does own that reputation for me. If I'm forced to pick one camera, even though we're in a pandemic, go on a trip, and I know I need a camera that can do everything, wide, telephoto, still video performance not being compromised, the RX10 does that. That's why it's still $1,600, even though it's been out for several years. And I can still highly recommend it. And that's part of the reason we haven't seen a replacement, although I do smell that replacement, and I think it's going to be coming real soon. So if you can wait for the RX10's replacement and don't care enough about whatever they end up improving, keep that in mind, because the price of this camera will drop because it stayed relatively firm. It debuted at I think $1,800, now it's $1,600. That shows you that nothing competes with this bad boy. But because these are so close in price, because I think they appeal to very similar consumers, I felt it was relevant and necessary to share with all of you the benefits as well as, of course, the downside to going with one versus the other. So again, dynamic range, battery life, autofocus. I mean, the A7C wins in just about every way. But when it comes to pricing and the fact that to really get the best out of the A7C, you're going to be spending several $1,000s on glass. That's where, for that novice, hobbyist, enthusiast, I will remind them that the RX10 Mark IV, even though it has a measly 1-inch sensor, is still a dynamo. And it is going to deliver probably much of what you're looking to do, and you will not be spending any more money except for on grips, maybe a gimbal. This is a great camera to stick on a gimbal, folks. Batteries, SD cards. Whereas here, you're just getting your feet wet into an interchangeable lens camera system, which is a whole nother beast. So, recapping. In my opinion, this is the all-in-one to own. So if that's what you're after, remember that. But when it comes to still quality, video quality, battery life, autofocus, the A7C takes a royal dump on this camera. We're not gonna do anything other than call it like it is on my channel. But if you're willing to make compromises so that you don't have to spend more money, so that you don't have to carry any more glass, so that you don't literally need a gear bag, the RX10, that takes a dump all over the A7C. Sorry for all of my fecal matter imagery here. But that is really where it's at. Also, something I have yet to mention that's part of what makes the RX10 unique and comparable in a world of mirrorless digital SLR replacements is not just its body, but the customizable buttons. If you believe in any form of manual control, believe it or not, you've got more here than you do here, which doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. If you noticed, we have dedicated aperture control on body for both of these cameras, but you may have noticed C2, C1, there's a C3 down here. With the A7C, you have one customizable button, and that's the end of it. Again, speaking to who Sony thinks the A7C is going to be of interest to, which is why I am comparing these two cameras right now in this video. Because if this is really targeting prosumers alone, then prosumers, be on notice, be aware that, this is, the A7C is the better, leave it and live in auto mode camera. But the RX10 Mark IV is the camera that was designed to be left in auto, but is also going to be the only camera in your bag unless you want to bring along something like an action camera, something really low profile that could outperform or go places your smartphone won't. That's what I would say. And of course, this has, HFR, which is now S&Q. That's the high frame rate, slow and quick. Didn't exist on earlier cameras, but it does exist here. It's just something you need to be aware of. Yes, we do have 3 customizable shooting modes here that do not exist on the RX10, but I just inevitably feel like the RX10 feels more like a digital SLR than the A7C. And that's not a good or a bad thing. It's really just something I need to point out to all of you. But again, in terms of still and video performance, you're going to get better results from the A7C in every way. But you'll also be spending a lot more money, and not just at that first price of entry. Again, $1,800 for the body, $1,600 for the camera. And this is not a bad lens. I mean, granted, you can't put a prime on the RX10, but the Zeiss glass that's incorporated into this and its reach being 600 millimeters and the ability to turn the click on and off for still versus video shooting so that you can actually physically feel where you're at. I mean, these are things that Sony knew who they were making this camera for. And remember that even though this is old, it's not totally antiquated. You still have all of the ports you would be getting from a top-of-the-line camera. That means microphone input, headphone jack for monitoring, HDMI, clean HDMI out, no Type-C, because this is too old for Sony to have Type-C, but you do still have their multi-port, which is AKA micro USB. So this is still a really full-featured camera, and it should not go unnoticed. The glass does perform incredibly well. In fact, this is, I think, my fiance's favorite camera of all of the cameras I have. And that's because if you care about being able to shoot anything, I don't just mean landscape or street photography, but detail, architectural detail. The reach on this lens opens up a whole new world for you that realistically, again, I'll bring back this monster, you would need the G Master 100-400 to even approach with the full frame sensor. And this is $2,500 alone. So price isn't everything, but it certainly means a lot. And when you put it all into context, I want everyone to be aware that I'm not comparing these because their raw output is similar. It's not. 1-inch, full frame, the dynamic range is in a whole nother league. And as I've already stated over and over again, the autofocus here is in a whole nother league. But this is a complete product. This is an incomplete product in that you're going to have to pick up several lenses. And even though this is the smallest full frame mirrorless interchangeable lens camera that Sony has ever made and has its current color science, which straight out of camera, again, for a novice, is a huge benefit, pros alike, you still are going to need a gear bag. Not as big a gear bag as for something like the A7R4 or A7S3 or A9 series, whereas here you're going to have a bag, but not a gear bag, because the only other things you'll have are SD cards and batteries. So just putting it out there. You're not going to see too many people compare these, I don't think. I haven't looked. I don't have time to really look at what people are doing on YouTube anymore, believe it or not, even in a pandemic. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? But both of these are on auto for a reason right now. They're designed for that. This will perform better, but it just will not be able to do what the RX10 can do out of the box with the range of this lens. I mean, 20 some odd millimeters to 600. That's just, there's a reason it's still the king of bridge style cameras. If I had to pick personally between the two, I would go RX10. And it's because of what I said earlier in this video, that if I had to pick one camera, if I knew I could only travel with one, I would be selecting the RX10. And I've got a lot of cameras here without using any expletives. And it's for the reason I said at the top of this video, which is that it is so dynamic, even if it doesn't have the dynamic range, not trying to be cute, even if it doesn't have the full frame sensor quality, both in still and video, that the A7C has, it doesn't have the gyro, it doesn't have the real-time tracking, it still is far more versatile overall. It's going to allow me, put it this way, when I come back from that trip, when we're out of this pandemic shithole, traveling, coming back from vacation or whatever it would be, hopefully a friggin' vacation, right, for all of us, you would never know that I shot all of the images with one camera. You would think that I brought an interchangeable system and a bevy of lenses. Here you will have to do that. And that really sums things up. Of course, cropping in on images from this 1-inch sensor, 20 megapixels, it's going to start to look like a watercolor painting. That is something you need to know coming in. And that's the difference between the 1-inch sensor and the full frame. That's not going to happen with the full frame. It's just the way the tech works. It's the way full frame photography works. Just like the dynamic range is not going to be similar. So just these are things you need to know. The stabilization in this is also not as good, just as the buffer isn't as good. Look, I could go on and on about the shortcomings of this camera, but I'll tell you right now, there's a reason, as I stated earlier in the video, it has held such competent resale value, and that's because there is still no better bridge camera in business in 2020 until Sony comes out with a new model. Oh, and by the way, lest I forget, we got a flash, which a lot of consumers looking at the A7C have been scratching their head. Why no flash? And it's because Sony's vision, and it's not just Sony, it's a lot of manufacturers, their vision of pro-grade gear does not incorporate a flash because no pro is going to use a built-in flash. I mean, it's a better than nothing scenario, but they're going to have an external flash or actual lighting. So just be aware. That's another thing that for the person who's buying their first great camera, which is what I feel like both of these represent, that might be more appealing to you. Just like I've stated, the EVF is more appealing, for me at least. So you've got your pros and cons. The A7C is really better in just about every way other than, again, to reiterate one last time on this nearly 20-minute video now, the EVF is not better. The handling, I think, is actually better on the RX10. And, other than that, it has everything going for it except for the fact that you will need a nice bundle of cash to spend on glass to really get the best out of this. Whereas here, you're out the door at $1,600, and you can worry about what's new, great, and amazing once you get your chops on this. And this is still often used by run and gun photojournalists for a reason, and that's because it can do everything. This can do everything if money is no object. And I probably should have said that right at the top of the video. Still can't do anything about the crappy EVF though. Don't forget it. Real-time tracking on the autofocus though for video is a huge game changer that I wish this camera had. And I would bet just about anything that with the new RX10, whenever it comes, but hopefully soon, we'll get the real-time tracking. We will get the new color science. We will get the FZ1000 battery. And unfortunately, it's probably going to be $2,000. But you know what? For $2,000, it's going to be the bridge style camera that I'll probably be comparing to the successor to the A7C, because it will be an instant buy for me. And that's when I will say goodbye to the RX10 Mark IV, just as I did to the RX10 III when I bought the RX10 IV. That wraps it up, folks. Two great cameras, very different, but I think they're targeted at the exact same, or at least very much overlapping audience. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button. And as usual, please feel free to subscribe, and please stay safe. Later.